Hello and most welcome to 1905 of our H series. We will today continue where we left off in 1903 with John V. Canfield's Private Language, the Diary Case. And it was on page 389 last time. And we went into this extraordinary interesting difference between past, present, and what is a criterion. So we see that there is a sort of, I don't know how to say this, temporal aspect to the PLA, to the private language argument. It doesn't really make any good sense to speak of a time as just flowing, but time is doing things, it has actions. One could say that there are different times going around, and in the example we took up, there is a time for knowing the truth of Tacitus. If he mentions that Lucius Calpurnius Piso has had been killed, and that killing was part of a conspiracy or not, that is one sort of time with its own evidential rules. And then it would be a completely different time for Alekhine, the chess player, to verify with a different sort of rule for present or criterion. If it really happened that there was a chess game where five queens were participating. There would have been 2 on one side and 3 on the other side. They make up for 3 extra queens. And we have a third rule for telling whether a certain artifact has been made at a certain time. We have carbon dating. And we have specific criteria to tell whether a certain species is been living at a certain time or died out. Archaeological remains, I think it's a good, or cosmological happenings. All these have different rules, different criterions, but when it comes to the case of my private insight to tell one memory from another, there is no criterion, and there couldn't be one. It's dead wrong from the very beginning. It is grammatical impossible to have a criterion, because there is no outward thing of doing it. And I'd say my conclusion of that would be that is similar, this nonsensical position to be in the non-possible Newtonian time that doesn't have any criterions as well. A sort of senseless world. So without criteria, the words lack or fail to mean something for us. They slide to the side. They disappear somewhere, never to return again. And this is a very, very, there's no possibility to exaggerating how important this passage in Canfield is. It rings well with modern physics, where we speak of an event rather than time and space. The event is the criterion. It's paired with the criterion. So in a way, quantum mechanics is much more exact than the idea of a flowing time, a timeline with X, Y, Z for space. An event has a criterion, and maybe this is what was discovered in the 1920s by the pioneers in quantum mechanics. Niels Bohr, Erwin Schrödinger, Pauli, Heisenberg, and Werner Heisenberg actually points it out. His famous uncertainty principle is exactly this. Without criterion, you can't know, which is self-evident in some way, but also extraordinary new. Remember, already at the 1920s, we were deeply cast in the thinking of logic, either or, and so forth. So I will continue the read. And we are now at the third paragraph, page 389. My sense of the investigations is that Wittgenstein would accept the past-present presupposition, and there are passages that suggest he would. For instance, he implies that the meaning of judgments of length is a function of the criteria governing them. Governing them. It would seem he would want to treat judgments about the past as similarly relative to the method used to assess them. Assess them. that on his view, those assessments will be made in the light of present tense criteria is intimated by the well-known remark that an inner process stands in need of an outward criteria. How true. I think we should say amen to that. Just as statements about the inner processes of others are justified by outer criteria, so it would seem statements about the past are justified by present tense criteria. Criteria. In both cases, that which would otherwise be beyond scrutiny becomes knowable through accessible criteria. Criteria. In a related way, Wittgensteinian considerations about how people might learn to make past tense claims suggest the necessity of present tense criteria. With regard to the substantive issue, it might be held that criteria for present tense claims automatically generate one's governing past tense versions of those claims. Thus, consider this example in the last 2 minutes before the first of the fatal knives touched him. Julius Caesar blinked an even number of times. Blink, blink, blink. We know what a blink is and how to count how many occurred in a given space of time. So it may be said, we know the meaning of that claim about Caesar. We have a criterion. The criterion governing the claim is simply whether Caesar did in fact blink an even number of times in that interval, or so it may appear. Similarly, in the diary case, the diarist might say that the criterion for whether he remembered right when he thinks he associated the name S with some earlier exemplar of this. Is simply whether at that time he did associated the name S. Is simply whether at that time he did associate them. No criterion. We know that it is to associate some sign with some present experience. Hence, analogously to the Caesar case, we know what it means to say we did earlier make such an association. We might not be able to know about Caesar's blinks or the diarist earlier private ostensive definition, but nonetheless there's a criterion in each case. In fact, I do not think it legitimate to pass in that way from a present tense criterion to one governing a past tense claim. A claim. I shall come back to this substantive issue as it bears directly on the diary case. But first, I shall continue the exposition of paragraph 258 of the assumption that Wittgenstein makes the presupposition in question. in question. We shall find that we can now answer two crucial exegetical questions posed at the beginning of this paper. I just need to get some water. Just give me a little second here. I pause there. Why is a criterion needed? Why does Wittgenstein suppose there ought to be a criterion governing the connection right?
Right.
Right. I have rejected the answer that would go because the diarist need to know he remembered right, and knowing requires a criterion. Criterion. It is the claim itself and not the diarist's knowledge of it that needs a criterion.
Right.
Criterion. Again, why? One candidate answer is that all empirical propositions except for Wittgenstein's Äußerungen need a criterion. This dubious claim is not needed here. Regardless of any supposed general need for a criterion, it is clear the diary scenario assumes one, since it assumes the world is one way and not another. 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 That is to say, the diarist remembers right, presupposes a difference between states of the world that would make that assertion true, and those that would not. Would not.
Oh.
A criterion will simply mark that difference. Further, the claim to remember right concerns the past. The diarist remembers right if he actually did establish the rule in the light of which he now judges. He now judges. So the key presupposition discussed earlier holds here. The criterion needed will be a present tense on one. It will have reference to what exists at the time of the diarist judgment S or subsequently. Oh, subsequently.
Subsequently. Subsequently.
Why is there no criterion in the diary case? The diarist can, of course, appeal to no public criteria, no whatsoever. Nothing, nothing. The effect of the absence of public criterion can be made plain by reflecting on examples given earlier. The idea is to move incrementally toward the private case. By subtracting the criterion holding at a given stage. In doing so, we will be following in more detail a path Wittgenstein laid down when he introduced in paragraph 243 what is in effect a lifelong crucial example as a step toward isolating the truly private language considered in subsequent passages. Obviously, there can be no written record of the private definition, since there are no public words available to refer to the alleged referent of S. Nor can we set up a standard sample and test a present possible instance of S against it. Against it. In the case of the tribe that uses red to subtract the criterion, means to imagine that a surrounding practice of using the word does not exist. For if it did, there would be a criterion. Criterion. To imagine away the tribal practice is in effect to transform the example into a Robinson Crusoe case. Crusoe, where art thou, Friday? Where art thou? But as we have seen, a Robinson Crusoe type use of red still requires a practice albeit of the one-person type. We are able to predicate. He remembers the rude right on the basis of a certain consistency in the use of red. And he could apply such criterion to himself, when we subtract all hints of a practice, even the truncated one of a lifelong solitaire, we reach the stage of a private diary. Hooray! Finally. Wittgenstein's reason for saying that there is no criterion is simply at this stage there is nothing left that would count as one. The diarist looking around for a possible criterion confronts only the contents of his mind. The reference is to the present or subsequent contents of his mind. Since the criterion must be a present tense one.
Present tense one.
Present tense one, indeed. It has to be in the present. At the time of the diarist judgment S, nothing, absolutely nothing in his mind could possibly count as a criterion. except for the feeling that he does remember the connection right. The lack of an objective criterion leads to the last two sentences of paragraph 258 and the corresponding rejection of the idea of a private ostensive definition. And now we come to subchapter 7, the problem of the tautological criterion. I turn now to the substantive objection that the insistence on a present tense criterion is mistaken. For it may be said there obviously is a criterion. I remember the connection right, and it is not a present tense one. The criterion is twofold. A, I seem to remember the connection was made such and such. And B, the connection made was such and such. I call this alleged criterion tautological because it merely paraphrases or unpacks. He remembered such and such right. The statement is true, provided he thinks he remembers such and such occurring, and in fact, it did. It did. Paul Moser, for example, seems to appeal to such a criterion in attempting to refute the PLA. Oh dear. I think Wittgenstein would consider such an appeal a non-starter. On the ground that it only pushes the issue back a step. What is needed now is a criterion governing the claim that the connection made was such and such. And just as there is no criterion for remembering right, there is none for that claim. Exegesis aside, however, the objection has a strong substantive appeal. Appeal, indeed. Thank you, Echo. In reply, I will first set out the opposing claim more fully. At T3, say, the diarist is aware of some private phenomenon he calls this. His memory at T3, which may or may not be right, is that the rule he introduced at T0 held that S was to stand for a T0 exemplar of this he is aware of at T3. The criterion for having remembered right is that whatever it is focused on at T0 and with which he associated the sign us is the same as the this. Not likely. He deploys at T3 in stating his memory claim. I think this could be a good stopping point here. Memory claim. A nice word. Five. So let's go for some quotes there. We have now established memory claim at least. We have 11:30. If I remember rightly, you need to leave at 12. Let's see here. So we are continuing what we start speaking about in 1905. And this is an expounding and expansing, I think, more clearly, what is a criterion? What could serve as a criterion? Some things simply couldn't serve as a criterion. That is very important to remember. We can see a third paragraph on page 389. And it's on the third paragraph about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down.
Which page?
It's page 389.
5, 6 lines down. Okay. 5, 6 lines down. Okay. Thank you.
It's on the third paragraph. So it's a short one. There's a second paragraph, and there's a paragraph beginning with my sense. And it's, I think, 6, 7 lines down. And in a process stands in need of outward criteria. That needs to be chiseled in. There are no exceptions for that. We have now come to that understanding. I think we have that pretty clearly established. There can be no exceptions to it. Otherwise, we would be talking tautological nonsense. This is extremely pertinent. It makes a whole lot of change. So even we come here, take the last sentence of the same paragraph, in a related way, Wittgensteinian considerations about how people might learn to make past tense claims suggest the necessity of a present tense criteria. And this you can compare to the idea of a Newtonian criteria. That is also a sort of a tautological one. There is no, the Cartesian Newtonian criteria is a non-criteria. So you see a table shift here. What is usually assumed to be a criteria, often vaguely pointed to as being empirical or most often epistemological, turns out to be tautological, nonsensical, having no criteria. And even if you go to the next paragraph, we do have a criteria for whether Julius Caesar blinked an even numbers of times when Brutus put the fatal blow. But there is no criteria for the truth in the Cartesian take. They have no doings, they have no happening. You just say them to be truth, or the truth. I think an example that Wittgenstein may put forward is think of God. And in a Newtonian sense, God has no criterion, or a Cartesian sense. There is no need for that parameter equation or that decimal. Whereas in ordinary practice, there are criterions. Doings, praying, worshipping, liturgy, repeating, iterating, and so on and so on. So, oddly enough, a false sense of reality, a false sense of what can be a criterion, has come to lead to a rejection a complete rejection of things that actually have criterions. So it's a table turner of great extents. And I mentioned, I think it was a couple lectures ago, quantum mechanics do not accept the non-criterion of the Newtonian Cartesian take. Instead, they are speaking of an event, like in the Wheeler-de Witt equation. An event has or have criterions. Not criterions in the terms of time and space in the Cartesian sense, but real criterions, doings, actions. Like the blinking of the eyelids of Julius Caesar. That could have happened, but it would be, of course, extremely hard to know. So this private language argument is indeed very important, not to be underestimated. It has great significance. It leads to most definite world-changing character. Everything changes once we go very deeply into these matters. There is a revelation of sort, to use a word we'd had coming up in in the other lectures. Sorry for that. But I say it's not far from it. Let's look at the private language weirdness. So even the blinking of Julius Caesar does have a criterion, whereas that would be the fifth sentence, the fifth line, sorry, of the last paragraph. Similarly, in the diary case, the diarist might say that the criterion for whether he remembered right when he thinks he associated the name S with some earlier exemplar of this in italics is simply whether at the time he did associate them. This is a circular reasoning. This is the tautology. It doesn't seem to have any sensible criterion. The only thing is this circular thing. We go to page 390. So I think we established why a criterion is needed. And we go down to the third paragraph here. Why is there no criterion in the direct case? The first line here. So we slowly reach the understanding. It won't come directly, of course. This is an eye-opener of, I'd say, cosmological, and I'm not exaggerating, the cosmological fallacy is included here. The third line, we see here a hint how to understand this. The idea is to move incrementally toward the private case by subtracting the criterion holding at a given stage. In doing so, we will be following in a more detail a path Wittgenstein laid down when he introduced in paragraph 243 what is in effect a lifelong Crusoe example as a step toward isolating the truly private language considered in the subsequent passages. So in the next paragraph, we can clearly see, obviously, there can be no written record of the private definition since there are no public words available to refer to the alleged referent of S. Nothing, zero, zilch. And in the last paragraph on that page, the third line, the diarist looking around for a possible criterion, poor diarist, confronts only the contents of his mind. The reference is to the present contents of his mind, since the criterion must be a present tense one. At the time of the diarist judgment S, nothing in his mind could possibly count as a criterion, except perhaps for his feeling that he does remember the connection right. And then we go one step further, we abandon the ideas we had, and we go to page 391, as we already are. On the second line here, for it may be said there is obviously a criterion governing I remember the connection right, and it is not a present tense one. The criterion is twofold. A, I seem to remember the connection was made such and such, and B, the connection made was such and such. I call this alleged criterion tautological, because it merely paraphrases or unpacks. He remembered such and such right. It's a tautology, circular reasoning. There is nothing to bind in the criterion cogito ergo sum, neither in any of the Cartesian claims. And although the Newtonian chart can serve as a very helpful tool in the mechanics, it will not serve as a criterion in our world, in our living world. It's actually to be revealed to be a tautology. And can you see the word changer this means for things like soul and free will? They all have criterions in doings. They don't have ousia or estain criterions. They cannot be referred to something in the XYZ. But God is not an estain. He is a doing. And he has criterias. Kalle, please come in, and let me remind you here, you need to speak directly into the microphone because the lack of speakers here.
Let us focus on the blinking.
Oh, Julius Caesar.
Yes, it is a funny example, but
Yeah.
I think it's very revealing.
Good.
This shows that there is no determinism, because you can never establish how many times he blinked,
No.
and you could say, who cares how many times he blinked? Well, it could have a meaning. Say that he had a blink, like a meaning blink. Come on, kill me. That's fine. It was ironical. That's fine. So it would change the whole meaning. Or was he afraid? I don't think so. It was not part of his nature, perhaps. But it gives a different meaning to history. His blinking, so to say. And and you could still ask who cares. I would like to juxtapose with this paper that we went through last time, the last Wittgenstein paper. This 2017 paper by Lin. No, let me see. It's not. No, it was not this one. What was the Lin 2017 paper? Let me see if I can find it. 2017 was the wrong link. Let me see. No, I don't think it. Lin. Oh, Francis. I don't think I will find it. What was the name of that paper?
The previous.
What was the name? Let me see. No, it was not this one either. So I would need. We have so many.
Wittgenstein's private language argument. I think that was the name of it.
Wittgenstein was private.
By Francis Wiley.
Okay, now I get it. Okay. So we went through the important part during the lecture 1887.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah,
it was
very
about
good.
Morley's experiment. We can remember it was that year of the discovery of the Morley's light discovery, Michelson Morley, and it is on page 271 on this the printout. 271, the key phrase. 271. So let me see. Let me put it bigger. So let me see. At these two moments, let me see. It's on this paragraph. Here is 271. This is the key phrase. At these two times, the position of my eyes are highly unlikely to be completely the same throughout the lightning conditions. So this we could juxtapose to Caesar's blinking. So the thing is that this shows that you can never establish what happened in the. You can never say that one thing that happened in the past is identical with something else, or rather that one sentence is identical to something else. If you use only the private language argument.
Yes, it will not be the two same positions as is claimed in the private language argument, and it's nonsensical even.
And this we could compare with chaos theory with the butterfly, and we know that the chaos theory says that if can you say it in English? A butterfly's wings, if it do you remember exactly about the butterfly wings? It can cause a storm if it bats its wings.
Well, if a butterfly flaps its wings in Texas, there will be a major tropical storm in Brazil, something to that effect.
Yes, or vice versa. So it's like the blinking of eyes. And this shows that determinism is never possible.
No.
Because so extremely small conditions can cause tremendous effects. And this in turn shows that Caesar's blinking could have an eye, to have an effect if he blinked to Antonius, his companion, fellow soldier, at the right moment that could have saved his life.
Oh yeah.
So there is much at stake.
There is much at stake, definitely.
So small changes, indefinite small changes, can have extremist
And I would
impacts.
say this holds for this text, because I think the majority of people reading Canfield and Francis Lynn would say, what does it matter? And it matters in enormity. But most people will say, what does it matter? Because all of a sudden we have this table turning. So all the claims of Newtonian / Cartesian thinking turned out to be completely nonsensical. And all of a sudden we come back to the real world with criterions.
Yes. So thanks to Jesus, this example of Jesus blinking and the butterfly, and so forth, we can establish at least two things. One, determinism is never possible, because there is small changes have enormous effects. Two is that you can never only have your own. You need always an outward criteria, because what you think, two things in the past, what I think I had pain yesterday, it corresponded to the pain today. And I think that is the same thing. But if I don't have outward criteria, for instance, a doctor controlling it at both times is of no use.
No, then you wouldn't have a criterion.
And we could I don't know. We use
It
this
makes a whole lot of difference when it comes to things like soul, God, free will, and the reason is actually something nonsensical at bottom. But we need to be careful when we go that path. It takes time to establish the understanding.
We had already this example, but this is about thinking. We could end this with a light note. Hopefully this is the right video.
He blinks as well.
And then he pretends to
be asleep.
Yes, he pretends to be asleep, so in order to so he can do his own things.
Yeah.
And create Germans that will arrive soon, I think.
If you want to have the videos flow better, you should take down the quality of them so they will download easily. I'll show you the setting next time we meet.
Okay, let's end there. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye,
thank
bye.
you very much. Very concluding remark. The private language argument changes free will, as pointed out by Kalle here. It becomes even nonsensical to say that there is no free will. So all the arguments against free will disappears. And it's a table turner. It's definitely a revelation. So what seems to be extremely little of little importance, like a butterfly flapping its wings is of incredible importance. Incredible importance. I would say it's one of the most important lectures we had, but of course, this is the top of the iceberg. Without Francis Y. Lin, Paul Johnston, Edmund Dane, Wittgenstein himself, it wouldn't be possible. And of course, it wouldn't be possible without Kalle Lundahl, your excellent comments, your Jesuit-like participation, not giving up, and of course, you, everyone who listens in, participating in that way, which is of incredible importance as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or evening. Bye-bye for now.